Well, I think that China is still largely a peripheral player when it comes to the Middle East. On many of the major issues that are at play there, I wouldn't say that China is necessarily in a driving role. That being said, there clearly are some issues where China is playing, I think, a very important role. One of the examples being the Iranian nuclear program, where China's cooperation on the Security Council and had the passage of sanctions in 2010 is obviously quite significant. And then more broadly, the question of China's economic relationship with Iran has moved to being, I think, a central concern for many in the United States and in the broader international community, as European and other Asian companies have backed away from Iran because of its illicit nuclear activities. I think that there's a perception that China has continued to do a lot of significant business with Iran. Particularly, there's a concern that it may be involved in the energy sector, which is one of the areas that the United States has unilaterally sanctioned. Another area where I think China is obviously significant is simply as a member of the UN Security Council. As issues related to the Arab Spring come before the Council, China de facto has a say. And so that's obviously played out first in the case of Libya, where China ultimately supported UN Security Council Resolution 1970 and abstained on 1973, and will also play out as we look at what's happening in Syria. Yeah, I think that this is an area where there frankly is a great deal of concern. On the positive side of the ledger, China did not veto the Security Council Resolution 1929, which was passed by the UN last year, which was the latest round of sanctions, and obviously China also acquiesced to previous rounds of sanctions against Iran because of its non-cooperation with the IAEA and the questions associated with its nuclear program. But at the same time, I think there is a great deal of anxiety, as I said before, that while other companies from other parts of the world have backed away from Iran because of its illicit conduct, also because of, obviously, its support for terrorism in the region and its horrific human rights record, particularly since the 2009 election, that China has continued to do a fair amount of business with Iran. Now, I think you will hear from some that China has exercised certain restraint. It has not dramatically and very visibly escalated the business that it could be doing with Iran. But I think that in general, there still is a perception that there's too much going on there. I'll relate, I was recently in a meeting with an official from an allied country who works on the Iran issue, and I asked, what are your priorities, what are your concerns? And he said, well, issue number 1, 2, and 3 is China, China, and China. And I don't think that would have been the case, say, 5 or 10 years ago. And that reflects just the rising economic role of China with regard to Iran. You just look at the total trade flows. It's gone down dramatically for Europe, and it's gone up dramatically for China, which is unfortunate. Well, obviously, we hope that the Arab Spring will be successful, and that will mean governments in the region that reflect the will of their people, that respect human rights, that are democratically elected. Obviously, that's the hope. We'll see what actually plays out. To quote a great Chinese thinker, Zhou Enlai, it's too soon to tell. What I would say is that it's also hard to predict exactly what a successful Arab Spring would mean for China. But in general, I think that if you have governments in the region that are going to be supportive of and respectful of human rights, democratic norms, and that are also going to consequently be more concerned about democratic norms globally, then that may make for a more challenging environment for China. But that being said, we're a long way from there. And I think it's also entirely possible that some of the governments we see emerge out of the Arab Spring are going to be more populist, are going to, at times probably, particularly in countries that where the old regime had a close relationship to the United States and to the West, they may play on some anti-Western sentiment that exists, and that could actually create an environment which is actually more conducive for China. So the Arab Spring, as they say, it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future.